Kuphi na kuphi emakhaya amadolobheni asokoplasta khona sawubona ke mbukeli sesifikile ke thina nelihlelo ilungelo lakho thi you're right uhlelo kona luthela ke konke lokuthinza nine nemalungelo enu njengebathengi mina ke ngisimphiwe Ngcongwane bekunene lenyanga ya May yekugubha nekuphakamisa ke amalungelo etisebenzi ngaloko ke sithe ke namhla asesibuke emalungelo alabo labasebenta njengema-cleaner labasebenza ke kuhlanzeka kwetindlu kwemahovisi kanye ke namabhilidi sikasilesinengi ke babukelwa phasi futhi ke bahlukunyedwe asasingena endzabeni yethu namhla sive ke ngabantu ngekuvikelwa kwamalungelo abo. As South Africans join the world in observing Workers' Month, most of those employed in the cleaning industry have nothing to celebrate. And this is because some employers think and feel nothing of shortchanging and abusing these often vulnerable employees. And kukhuluma kabanti ke ngekuvikela kwabasebenzi ke labangema cleaners eNingizimu Afrika asesimukele ke Jack Mazibuko lomele ke i-Contract Cleaning National Provident Fund ECCNPF. We also welcome Lennox Bachelor yena ke ubuya e-National Contract Cleaners Association. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Good afternoon. Welcome.
Good afternoon.
It's an absolute pleasure having you join us this afternoon. I'm going to ask to just share with us your background and what your association does in terms of upholding the workers of contract cleaners.
Thank you, Simpiwe. So I represent National Contract Cleaners Association, and the association is an association of companies. It's a voluntary association where we make sure that our members apply the law. We make sure that we contribute the correct wages. We make sure that our cleaners are on the provident funds and that their bonuses, etc., that we are complying and that we're not shortchanging the cleaners on the ground. We do recognize that there is a non-compliance element to the industry, and we ensure that through our audits, we minimize the opportunity for our members to not contribute correctly.
When you say it's a voluntary association, what do you mean by that?
Not all contract cleaning companies need to belong to an association.
Okay.
So it's a voluntary association, but we do represent approximately 80% of the companies in the industry. So we've got a bulk of the industry that are members of the association. But look, ultimately, there is no legislative requirement to belong to the NCCA, and we continue to hope to grow the association.
And what are the interests that you are fighting for, advocating for, or even representing on behalf of the contract workers?
Yeah, look, first and foremost and fundamentally, it's compliance in the industry. We've got legislated wages, we've got a provident fund, we have got to contribute bonuses, and myself and Jack, we've been negotiating in the contract industry for well over a decade now. And so what we try and ensure as an association is those legislative requirements which we have negotiated over many years, we try and make sure that they're enforced on our members.
Okay. Jack, let me also bring you in. What does the Provident Fund do in terms of the welfare of contract workers?
No, thank you very much. The fund was formed in 2001. It is a fund that was formed by both employer association and many unions after a long struggle where we came together through the negotiations that we need to establish the fund that will protect the interest of the vulnerable employees, sorry, put it that way, who are the cleaners in particular. What the fund is doing is making sure that as and when the cleaners are going on retirement, they have enough money to sustain their family and to take their kids at school. The fund, as it started in 2001, it has become a legislative through sectoral determinations. Therefore, all the employers who are employing cleaners in a contract form, they need to belong to the fund. It's now a sectoral determination. So what the fund is doing is making sure that all the South African employers, they must belong to this fund. They must contribute towards the cleaners. They must pay 5.25 contribution. Cleaners must pay 5.25 contribution. That is the money that the fund, through its trustees, they make sure that that money is invested. The cleaners, they get funerals. As and when they retire, they get their money to sustain themselves.
So is the Provident Fund work collaboratively or parallel with other Provident Funds, or is it just a standalone fund for the cleaner contract workers?
Yeah, the Contract Cleaning Provident Fund is a standalone for contract cleaning employees. Okay. You'll understand that the cleaners that are working in a contract cleaning sector. Most of them, they are contract employers. That is why there's a word contract cleaning, because they don't work for a longer period. Some of them, it will depend on the contract between the employer and the service provider.
Okay.
Some of them, it can be 5 years. Some of them, it can be 10 years. So we cater for them. During the time of their employment, they need to be protected. Their rights need to be protected. Contribution must be made.
Okay. Now, Lennox, let's talk about whether the cleaning industry is regulated in South Africa. What have you observed in terms of that?
Look, it most certainly is regulated. We have got very specific laws governing the cleaning sector.
Okay.
So the hourly wages get promulgated on an annual basis. The Provident Fund contributions, as Jack has already alluded to, is a 5.25% equal contribution. We have negotiated things like minimum hours of 6 hours per day a few years back. So in terms of the legislation, it is quite a well regulated industry. The issue which we've picked up is more the enforcement of those laws. So we've got very good laws. I think we continue to believe that we can and will uphold those. However, the difficulty is that the infrastructure is not there to make sure that all employers are compliant. So we really try as a fund and as a PO and as trustees of the fund to make sure that we communicate and we create awareness amongst all contract cleaning companies of the laws and legislations regarding the Provident Fund and contributions.
And does the industry play a role in our economy? And if so, what role does it play in terms of, just building the economy and uplifting the economy in its entirety?
Look, it most certainly does play a pivotal role. I think one of the areas where we pride ourselves is that it is one of those gateways and opportunities into employment. So we recognize that we are really, and very often we are one of those first steps into getting individuals employed. The industry currently employs in the region of about 100,000, maybe just below 100,000 cleaners. So, and if we take every cleaner, they would generally support a household and possibly 2 or 3 beyond that. So we recognize that it is a significant part of the industry, and we hope to continue growing that.
Yeah. And I want to ask both of you this question. Is the industry open to calling out rogue elements in its, in its ranks? Or do we always have to wait for a media expose to expose some ugly truths about what really goes on in the industry?
No, what we normally do as the contract cleaning, as the trustees, we have agreed that time to time we need to interact with members through general meetings. And when we are interacting with members, we don't call only the members of who belongs to the fund, we call all the cleaners within the industry. And in that we are able to get the employers that are not complying. And we have put measures in place within the fund itself. We have the legal team that we have employed, whose job is to make sure that all the employers do comply. It's not an easy exercise because there's a lot that need to happen. There are many institutions that must come to party. The FSCA is assisting us, the Department of Labor is assisting us, but ourselves internally as the fund, we are also doing our best to force compliance.
Your thoughts, Lennox?
Yeah, look, I echo Jack's sentiment. I think maybe just one of the areas where we really have focused on as trustees is we have identified certain, as you call them, rogue employers. And we have instituted litigation against several institutions, and we've been, in general, quite successful. We do have resistance in some areas, but we already have right up to beyond the Supreme Court of Appeal judgments that it's not a voluntary fund. If you want to operate in the contract cleaning sector, it is not an optional add-on to have the cleaners on the Contract Cleaning National Provident Fund. So look, we're quite comfortable in the legislation, and you're going to get the rogue employers, and it is, I guess, our role as trustees to make sure that we do our bit to enforce compliance on that.
You just mentioned resistance by the employers or by your members. So I want us to get to the bolts and the nuts of this particular issue. What is it that the employers are not complying in? What are some of the non-compliance cases that we've had to deal with?
Look, unfortunately, the industry is quite a low-margin industry. So it is not an industry where we're going to be getting double-digit beyond that profit margin. So often what happens is what we've noticed is that the wage segment of the costing model comprises more than 80% sometimes of the fixed costs. So if your fixed costs in labor is 80%, very often we've picked up that there is a tendency for employers to be tempted to start shifting away and trying to manipulate those wages. But from an association point of view, that is where we go and conduct the audits, and we don't grant audits, we don't grant certificates to our members. So we do that quite frequently, but that's on an association side. On the fund side, we certainly do make sure that we press the issue of compliance across the country.
All right, gentlemen, let's leave it there for now. Let's pause a bit and take a commercial break. Siyabuya khona manje mbukeli ungasayinzawo hlala kanye nathi leli ke ilungelo lakho. Welcome back everybody. Tincingo tethu sesivuliwe manje ukuthi nawe ungaba ingcenye yenkulumo yethu namhla ngekuthi ushare icingo khona manje la e-studio ku 0117140671 noma ke 0117140672. Ungasithumela futhi ne WhatsApp ku 0608449857 noma ke usithumele i-email or like our Facebook page and post your comments there. If you just joined us, namhla ke sikhuluma ngemalungelo ke alabo labacleaner ko ke ema contract cleaning staff in buildings, in offices, ukuthi ke yini lekumele ukuthi kwendiwe kubamba noma ke ukuphakamisa emalungelo abo. And before we get deeper into the conversation, let's take our first caller. Sina Khayisile lapha ke Eastern Cape. Sakomukele ehleleni sawubona. Khayisile in the Eastern Cape, good afternoon. Khayisile, are you there? Hopefully. All right, we seem to have lost Khayisile. We'll try to re-establish connection with Khayisile in just a moment. And we do invite you again to call us on 011. Well, I hope my colleagues will just post the numbers on the screens so that you can have a discussion, ask questions from the Contract Cleaning Association and as well as the Contract Fund. And I'm getting advisory that Khayisile is now on the line. A very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome. Khayisile, good afternoon. Welcome. And before that break, Lennox, you were just talking to us about, the compliance. How do the contract workers, or let me put it simply, do the contract workers have a right or access or a platform of checking whether the employers are compliant?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fantastic question. So this is one of the advantages of having platforms like this. So what we've recommended in the past and what we continue to recommend is that if employees are inquiring as to whether their employers are contributing towards the fund, they can make contact directly with NBC. So we've got NBC cleaningsc@nbc.co.za.
Okay.
And look, we also recognize that not all the cleaners are on email or that familiar with it. So we also have a 010-206-0000 number. Maybe we can share that later again. And they can make contact with NBC, who currently administer the Contract Cleaning National Provident Fund. And they can inquire with them, give their details, and they will certainly respond back to them to indicate whether, in fact, their employers are contributing towards the fund.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, Jack, from your perspective, what have you observed in terms of non-compliance?
Now, our observation through the general meeting that we have, now that lately the government have introduced the two-pot system, we have realized that majority of the employers, not majority per se, certain few individuals of the employers, because majority, they do comply, because if you look at the number of the members that we have in the industry, that is above 100,000, is an indication that majority of the employers are complying, but there are those that are not complying. And then that's why we have put all the measures in place in making sure that they do comply. But the two-pot system has exposed many employers, because when the workers are coming to claim their two-pots money, that's when we realize that some of the employers, they do deduct the money from the employers and from the members, and they don't pay it to the fund where it's supposed to go. Right. So we have make those measures in listing those employers, giving them to our legal team to make sure that they force compliance. But again, the general meetings are also assisting us to interact with all these employees, for them to come forward and check themselves as to whether these employers, are they complying. The compliance is on twofold. Sometimes the employer will deduct the money without providing the schedules, and that money is sitting there without knowing where the money is coming from. Others, there are those who just choose to be criminals. They deduct the money, they don't pay it at all to the fund. So as the trustees, we are working so hard in making sure that we push everyone to comply.
Hi, I've got so many questions about these deductions, but hold your thought. Let's take our first caller. So ubuyile ke Khanyisile ulapha ke Eastern Cape. Very good afternoon to you, Khanyisile. Sakumole ehleleni sawubona.
Hello.
Hello, thank you so much for calling in, sir. Welcome. What's on your mind?
Yeah, ngiyakubona.
Okay, siyabonga kakhulu baba. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Sorry, vuqani phela kude.
Okay, kulungile baba, buta umbuto wakho. What's on your mind?
Ayeba?
Okay, we seem to have a problem connecting with our phone lines today, but don't fret. We'll definitely try to establish those technical gremlins that are making its way on our broadcast today. But we continue with our conversation today. When it comes to, EMAT deductions, what are the deductions that come off a contract worker's salary, and where do those deductions go?
The employees, they paid 5.25 of their salaries.
You know 5.25
It's a 5.25% of the employee's salaries.
5.25% of the entire salary,
Yes.
okay.
And the employer, they contribute the same amount of 5.25 towards on behalf of the employees. And that money is the money that got invested. Let me just give you a background where we are coming from. In 2001, when we started the fund was having a 0-0. As we speak now today, after a decade, we have established this fund. We are talking about a fund that got billions that belongs to the workers. Mm-hmm. So those are the contributions that we made, and the trustees has make sure that all the time they apply their mind, choosing the right assets managers to invest those money on behalf of the employee, so that as and when the employee contract come to an end or employee go into retirement, they are beneficiaries of those money. Hence, the compliance is important.
Okay, so is the Provident Fund the only deduction?
The Provident Fund is only deduction that the employer and employee contribute, but within that, there are other deductions that are made from that to 5.25 from the employer and 5.25 from the employees. From the employees, for example, the employer contribution is the one that taking care of the funerals, is the one that taking care of other administration work. The 5.25 that belongs to the employees is a money that goes straight to the investment.
Okay. Maybe Lennox, we can touch base on that as well, about some of the deductions. What do they entail? What are some? He just touched base on the Provident Fund. So what are some of the deductions
that's a good question. So there would be the UIF deductions. The normal statutory deductions would also, as an employer, there are certain legal requirements to make contributions to UIF and COED and those things. So in addition to the 5.25% equal contributions, there are those statutory deductions that do take place too. But I think what Jack's alluding to is that in total, so if we were to combine the employee's contribution, so the cleaner contribution and the company contribution, combined it's a 10.5%. So 5.25 employer, 5.25% cleaner, we bring them together. But what Jack's alluding to is that of the 10.5%, there are certain administrative, for example, administrators, we obviously have to pay the admin fees. There's funeral cover, there's risk. So if employees tragically pass away while they're contributing towards the fund, they have got those additional covers too. So in addition to the 5.25% deduction of the company's contributions, there are those additional benefits to belonging to the fund.
All right, let's now talk about some of the basic conditions of employment. We were just chatting off air about an example I use that, say, a contract company is contracted to work at a certain building. Do the managers of that particular building have the right to issue instructions to the contract workers when it comes to the maintaining of that particular building and pertaining to their jobs, of course? And or do they have do the contract workers only have to take instructions from their bosses?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And the answer, I guess, will be it depends. The legal answer, and generally what we prefer, in bigger buildings like, I guess, these, there would be supervisory levels in place. So generally what would happen is what we call end user, or our client being, I guess, in this instance, an SABC, would come to either a contracts manager or a supervisor and say, we require this to be cleaned, these are the times, this is the level at which we would require it. And that communication would generally take place through a supervisor, and the supervisor then would give those instructions to the cleaners on the ground. In general, that would be the practice. However, you do get some instances where it's smaller operation where they only have one cleaner, where there isn't generally supervision or capacity for supervision and a cleaner. And there it would generally be a blended approach between a broader manager that maybe oversees 1 or 2 or 3 or more contracts, and then the client would generally give the instructions to that supervisor to bring it down to the ground. But it does also happen. I mean, I think it would be unfair to say that a client would never be entitled in a one-man operation to ask the cleaner to go and clean that boardroom or that ward. That does happen. But generally in the larger, more established businesses, there would be levels of instruction and management where the client would generally go to that level of management to give the instructions.
And I suppose we can extend that particular point you just made to the working hours. Say that particular building closes at a certain time, and by that time, when that time comes and the workers are still not done cleaning, what then happens? Then obviously they'll be forced to work overtime, and then who then pays the overtime? Is it the contract company or is it the building managers?
So at the end of the day, it's the employer who holds the responsibility. So if an employer, a contract cleaning company, has a cleaner that is working on the ground, that is a commercial negotiation that they would have to go and have with the client. Generally, those would be worked into contracts with the client, where they're ad hocs, where there are unexpected hours that they would have to work. The client would generally put that request through. Most of the companies these days have got well infrastructured biometric clocking devices, or they would have clocking devices. But to answer your question more broadly, it is the contract cleaning company that is obliged to pay the remuneration and to pay the overtime. Very seldom would the client get involved in that discussion. It's an employer-employee relationship, and that is where the buck stops with the employer.
All right, let's take another caller. Sina Nomalungelo ulapha eGqeberha sakomoyo ehlele Nomalungelo sawubona.
Mamela sana lam. Dumama Nomalungelo le.
Okay, ma'am. Siyabonga kakhulu kuso.
Bengiphangele ekitchen for 23 years.
Yeah.
Nge-12 kaDisemba ndayeka ngenxa yengxaki emilenze bathi mdantonyaka ngibe-65.
Okay.
Andifumananga nix. Akathethi into lo mlunkazi.
So ubusebenza kumlungu, ubusebenza kumuntu noma ubusebenza enkampanini? Ngubani wakuqasha mama? Bowusebenzela inkampani noma bowusebenzela umuntu?
Bengisebenzela umlungu endlini.
Okay, so uthi awuzange uphuma nalutho.
Ngiyahahaza le phone.
Okay, no, siyabonga. I think uvile umbuto wakho mama. So chubeka ubukele SABC1 lilungelo lakho. Tina intetho ke titawuphendula kulolu hlangothi. All right, that is actually a very good question. So please tune in after the break and we'll have your answer. Let's take another commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back mbukeli etingcingo nje solo tivuliwe ukuthi nawe ungaba ingcenye yale nkulumo yethu namhla uvakalise nembono wakho. Caller participation lines right now in our studio 011-714-0671 noma ke 011-714-0672. Ungasithumela futhi iWhatsApp ku 060-844-9857. You can also email your thoughts to consumer@sabc.co.za noma ke usithinze inkundla entetho yokuxhumana kubo Facebook. Let's take our next caller, and Nomalungelo, your question is noted. We'll definitely answer your question in a moment, but for now let's take another caller. Sinatikeledi ulapha eBrakpan. Very good afternoon to you. Sakomoyo ehlelweni sawubona.
Sawubona njani?
Siphilile kunjani mama?
Ngiyaphila.
Khuluma nathi mama.
Mina bengisebenza eRoyal Serve Cleaning Mvela Serve Cleaning. Ngalimala emsebenzini. Mangilimala emsebenzini 2011. Namhlanje ngisamile. Abangibhatala bathini bathule bakhitu. Uyayibona?
Walimala usemsebenzini mama?
Yeah, ngawe stepsini.
Okay.
Yeah.
So since 2011 solo uhlele ekhaya awusebenzi and kude lwakuthola?
Yeah.
Sure.
Mabaqeda la bese bavala lento bavala le basuka la bathatha i-contract mara into zabo nazi ngiziphethe lama code number wabo nabo EMP code yonke lento le
isekhona le nkampani?
le kampani futhi bahamba bangena la mabona bayahlukumezeka bayasuka mara nase ebentuzanini ethi lento lema ubhadala ama-UIF bakhona lapha bavelile empilweni yami.
Lokusho ukuthi isasebenza le nkampani like iyachubeka iyasebenza?
Yeah, kusho ukuthi khona la isasebenza khona.
Okay, so now uzama ukuchumana nabo ubabuta kude lo impendulo lethola?
Bangiphenduli yonke into ngiziphethe zonke izinto.
Okay. Okay mama, bakhona ke namhla lapha.
Bengisebenza clinic ne?
Yeah.
I-job title cleaner.
Okay ma'am. Thank you so much for your call. Sabonga kakhulu ukushayela ke. They will assist you definitely. Please continue watching mama.
Niyenzeni?
Qhubeka ke ubukele lihlelo ilungelo lakho ke tikhona ke tini intethu ke titakusita kulelo hlangothi mama.
All right ke. All right.
Okay, siyabonga kakhulu ke kushayela. So in a nutshell, she was injured at work in 2011 and till today she's still not working and she didn't get any package and she was not assisted. And when she tried to investigate, and the company is still in operation, and she tried she tried reaching out to them, no answer.
Look, there are many ways that we can investigate this as an industry, and I think maybe what we should just do is separate. There are two issues here. So it appears.
By the way, the last caller, she was working for a company. She was a contract cleaner.
Yes. Yeah. So it sounds as if she was. I'm not sure if she was injured at work or not.
She was injured at work.
Okay. So generally, what would then happen is an employer would register that they should be contributing to the Workmen's Compensation Fund, and then there are workmen's compensation forms and claims that need to be instituted. So there's I don't want to get overly technical, but there's a WCL2 form which needs to be completed by the employer, and that then will go through with the medicals through to the compensation fund, and then they would generally address that. Now, I'm not sure in this instance whether those processes were followed, but there are ways and means to interrogate that. There is a way, if she was contributing to the fund, there's a different element to this discussion, which is maybe one which is important to be having, considering this, is if an employee is permanently and totally disabled as a result and while they're in employment, then there are insurance covers as part of the fund, what we call PTD, permanent and total disability. Now, I don't know the facts of the specific one, but those are the kinds of things which we as a fund do insure against. So there are payouts that would go to those employees in addition just to the salaries and the compensation funds. There is cover through the fund to make sure that there's assistance given to that cleaner.
Okay, just assuming that she was contributing, because she says she was employed by a contract company that was contracted to work at a clinic, and then she got injured at work. So assuming that all those deductions were made and she's still not getting her dues, so what then should happen?
Look,
where should she go?
Very good question. What I would suggest we do as a point of departure is let her make contact with the fund. Let her give her details, ID numbers. We keep records of all the contributions over the years. So that would be a good point of departure. Then we can locate her. Then we can inquire as to whether there were contributions. If there were contributions, then obviously we would have to take it further from there. But my recommendation to her would most certainly be start with the fund, the CCNPF, and then we can start the investigation.
Okay, I just want you to weigh in on that as well.
No, that's true. Interesting, I tell Mama Jens, which I contact contract cleaning. Asinikeza ama ID number wakhe sizokwazi ukuthi trace ukuthi employer be comply okanye benga comply. But in the event that the employer be comply and then umama soloka limala aphuma emsebenzini azange claim imali yakhe, then kusho ukuthi ifund isamkweleta. Ifund izwenza sure ukuthi umama uyabhadalwa. But at the same time sifuna kuyiqinisa lento ukuthi abasebenzi bethu mabaxhumane nefund mabaxhumane ne-Department of Labour, because that is an injury on duty. As we celebrate the Workers' Month, we must make sure that workers get the service. The workers are being serviced accordingly. It's very painful to hear ukuthi umama walimala emsebenzini and there's nothing happened, the company is running away. In the event that the company...
Maybe just reiterate what you should do.
Afonele contract cleaning for now. If there is we will check whether the employer was contributing or not. If the employer was contributing and she did not claim the money, the fund owes the money. The fund will pay that money if she was contributing to the fund.
Okay.
Yes.
And then in the event that she was contributing, but the employer did not dispense the money to the fund, what then happens? What's the recourse?
Then the legal department that we have within the fund will have to chase that employer and make sure that we take that employer to the task.
Okay.
To a point that we can take that employer to court.
Okay, Tigele ngiyathemba ke ukuthi utawusitala kulelo hlangothi sicela kusushayela icingo ushayele ke sicela uyiphinzele nombolo.
What is the name of the number again?
Your association
the
number.
NBC ones.
It's on the screen.
There it is.
010206000.
That's the number on your screen. Please dial it and give them the details, and then they will take it from there. And before,
but can I indicate something before you come in?
Go for
What
it.
we need for umama sicela as an payslip yakhe, asinikeze ne ID yakhe nama details we employer. That's how we'll start the investigation from the fund point of view.
Okay.
Yes.
And before Tigele, we had another caller, Nomalungelo, who's basically saying that she was working for this particular individual, but because of the working conditions were dire, she was forced to resign and she didn't get anything. And I think we need to make this distinction. Domestic workers are different from contract workers. And the discussion today is about contract workers. Labo ke labaqashwe tinkampani kuthi ke bayocleana ke emabhilidi noma ke emahhovisi itsite. But even then, I would like you to just weigh in on that distinction between domestic worker and a contract worker.
Yeah, it's a very, very good point. So essentially, the contract cleaning sector would generally enter into contracts with a client or an end user.
Yes.
And more often than not, a domestic employee would be working at a household or a group of households for an individual or for a family. So we don't, when I say we, the Contract Cleaning National Provident Fund does not operate in that space. That is the domestic sector. They have different wages and different terms and conditions of employment. For the purposes of our fund, we operate specifically where in the Contract Cleaning National Provident Fund, where there is the commercial contract between a cleaning company and a client.
All right. And it's also safe to assume Gutsege Provident Fund here who also caters for the contract workers only, yeah?
Contract cleaning employees.
Contract cleaning employees,
yes.
yeah.
But umama can still contact Department of Labor for further intervention.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's a good point you raise, that everybody employed in South Africa are covered and is covered by the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. And there are certain fundamental rights there, which irrespective of if you're operating in the contract cleaning sector or the domestic sector, there are certain overarching rights that you have as an employee that are protected across the country.
And then about domestic workers, like we shouldn't leave them in the lurch. Nangabe domestic worker feels gutsi ngale salary yakhe, he or she can contribute to the fund. Is the fund open to such individual contributions?
Unfortunately, the fund is not open to the domestic workers, but what I can assure you is that there is a union that is dealing with the domestic workers. I know they have entered into the discussion now recently with the government to try to have the similar fund that we have that will cater for domestic workers. Unfortunately, for now, we cannot accommodate them in the fund. Yes.
And then is there a particular instance or a possibility where contract workers retire empty-handed because of these underhanded tactics by the employers?
They do, yes, indeed. If the employer is not complying, then there is no contribution that the employer and the employee is making to the fund. And that is why we are saying all the employees have responsibility in making sure that the employer do comply, they do contribute. In an event that the employer do not contribute, the employee must come forward. They must tell us as a trustees that I've worked for certain employer who is not contributing, who is not deducting any provident fund on my salary, because that's why we are emphasizing the importance of employer to give the employees the pay slip. That's why the employees will realize that if the contribution is made or not. Sometimes the employer do deduct this money, and employees believe that the money has been deducted, has been paid to the fund, and only to find out at the later stage the employer was not paying the money. So what we do as the fund, on yearly basis, we give the benefit statement that we issue to all the members. It is through those benefit statements that the employees, they will get to know how much do they have in their retirement and whether the employer is complying or not. We issue out on each and every year on April.
Okay.
Yes.
Hayi sicela kushisa ke lenzaba kwanye lombukele kasesiphinza sijikela ngasetitolo hlala kanye nathi ke wena ukunene kungasanyakade siyabuya khona manje leli lungelo lakho Welcome back, everybody. Sagumolo futhi ngibukele. To take part in our conversation on this show, please call us right now on our participation lines on the screens right now, 011-714-0671 and 011-714-0672. Ungasithumela futhi na WhatsApp ku-060-844-9857. You can also email your views to consumer@sabc.co.za or interact with us on our Facebook page or like our page or post your comments there. Today's discussion is all about contract workers, and again we need to reiterate the distinction between domestic workers and contract workers. Domestic workers ngilabo ke laba cleaner ke emakhishini noma ke emakhaya ebantfu, and contract workers ngilabo ke labaqashe tinkampani kuthi ke bacleanele i-client yabo, and there's a big difference in terms of that. But today's discussion is all about contract workers, and we have the National Contract Workers Association and as well as National Cleaning Contractors Provident Fund to talk to us about some of the rights that are available to you as a contract worker as we celebrate Workers' Month. Gentlemen, I want to pick your brain on this. What then happens when there's a contract change between a contractor and a client? The contracts are terminated, and then the old contractor decides to hire employees of their own choice and leaving the old employees in the lurch.
Yeah. It is a practice, and we have seen it in the industry where very often, and what we always recommend, is that the incoming and the outgoing contractor, they work together. They try and ensure that there's a proper transition to ensure that as many of the staff are absorbed by the incoming contractor. So that is a practice which we've always emphasized as an association, and I think it's something which both ourselves and all the parties on the fund have always recommended, that there's engagement between the incoming and outgoing contractors to ensure that as many as possible of the cleaners that are operating in the current contract do in fact get offered opportunities with the incoming contractor. And anecdotally, we have found that that is a practice which has been quite well practiced. We do generally see that the vast majority of employees that are employed by the outgoing contractor do in fact get offered opportunities with the incoming contractor, yes.
So in the event there's no agreement between the incoming contractor and the old one, do the retrenchment rules apply in this particular instance? Yeah.
So there are processes to follow. There absolutely are legislative steps and consultations and notice periods. Yes, those certainly would apply in the contract cleaning sector.
Okay, the same laws also apply, Jack, when it comes to retrenchments or change of contracts?
Yeah, what we normally do, we encourage during this process where there's a change of contract, we encourage the cleaners not to claim their money up until the process is finalized. But in the event that at the end of the day there is no consensus between the two, and then the Section 189, the retrenchment take place, then the member can claim their money, then the fund will pay back their money. But should it happen that the employer agree to take over members in line with Section 197 transfer, members will continue with their contribution towards the fund without claiming their money, because at the end of the day, the fund is there to save for members when they go to retirement.
Okay, so will a 3-month waiting period, does it also apply whether the employee gets another job or not?
If employee get another job within the industry where the employer is contributing toward the fund, automatically the employee contribution will continue. But in the event that the employee get a job to a industry where the employer is not contributing, the fund is obligated to pay and deal with that employer in the event that that employer is not complying.
Okay, then in terms of withdrawals, do the same laws apply? Put simply, should the employee wait until they get to age 60? Or no withdraw in the event of a termination of a contract?
In the event that the contract got terminated completely and there is no possibilities that the employee can be taken over by another employer, employees have a right to claim their money.
Okay.
Yes.
How much of it can they claim? 2/3, 1/3, or the entire amount?
There is a legislation by now, but normally for now we are paying them the money that belongs to them.
Which means they are entitled to claim the entire amount?
Yes.
Okay. Have you heard anything about this particular legislation when it comes to withdrawals?
Look, I think if I'm reading between the lines, we're dealing with the two-pot withdrawals, and it is something which we have noticed has picked up. Obviously, there are reasons for the two-pot claims, and we have been monitoring those numbers, and there certainly appears to have been appetite from a portion of the cleaners to be able to dip into their funds. However, I must just highlight that that's generally not the practice at the termination of the contract. That would often be while they're still employed, they would have that opportunity to make those withdrawals into what we refer to colloquially as the two-pot system.
Yeah. And since my understanding that this particular legislation hasn't been passed yet, right, when it comes to withdrawals, what then happens should anything happen now? Should a contract be terminated now and then they need to claim their pensions and then they are told that they can't because this particular legislation is not in force?
Now, the fund always comply with the provisions of the law. So if the law hasn't been passed, it means we don't have a law. The fund has to pay what belongs to the employees. But in the event that the law has been passed and been gazetted, the fund need to comply with that particular legislation.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. And that is currently in practice. Yeah. So
yes.
That set of legislation, that's currently in place.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, got you. Bugela asibambe khona lapho ke sasa carefully gcina ngci. Do join us after this break. Leli lungelo lakho. Welcome to our very final segment. Unfortunately, our lines are closed, but don't fret because in the few minutes that we left of this show. Now, there's a certain scenario where a company or a group of individuals start a cooperative instead of starting a company and then engage contract workers as workers under this particular cooperative, to sort of avoid certain obligations that come with being a company. Have you heard anything to that effect?
Yes, Simpiwe, we most certainly have. It's a trend which we've seen is on the rise in the last couple of years. Now, I must just emphasize that a cooperative in the true sense of the cooperative is fine. There's no issues in the legal sense. However, what we have picked up is that there are certain people that are subverting the labour legislation, and they are not applying the labour, so the basic conditions and the Labour Relations Act and the Provident Funds, etc., under the guise that they're operating a cooperative. Now, we certainly feel quite strongly that there isn't really space in the contract cleaning sector for cooperatives. It's a low margin business, and more often than not, our experience has been that it's an opportunity to evade and not to pay the correct wages and the Provident Funds and the bonuses, because essentially those individuals would not be regarded as employees, but rather as part of the cooperative.
Have you come across that, Jack? And
yes,
have you had a cooperative, dispensing, money to your fund, ostensibly as Provident Fund?
No, they do. Some of the employers, when they avert compliance with sexual determination in paying, because remember, sexual determination is very broad in a contract cleaning sector. They need to pay towards the Provident Fund. They also need to pay towards the bonuses. All these processes have been legislated. So some of the employers, Nicodemously so, they choose to convert workers into a cooperative so that they can avert the compliance. That is very wrong. But we are engaging.
But then if they are forced to pay, all those other deductions that we've just mentioned, what's the point? What are the benefits then of starting a cooperative instead of a company?
There is no benefits other than to oppress workers, to deny the workers the rights that they have fought for over a period of time. And we are discouraging those employers who are doing that. And we also want to put a call to all the employees who are experiencing that to contact us in order for us to engage the Department of Labour to investigate this.
So if I can jump in there, it's maybe a recourse discussion, because essentially what happens is if you're not an employee, you don't have the avenue of the CCMA, you don't have the avenue of the Labour Court, you can't go to the Department of Labour, because the cooperative is essentially going to say, but you're not an employee, you're part of the cooperative. So it does mean that it's very difficult to maintain proper oversight over those bodies because they don't regard them as employees. And once there isn't that oversight body, it does create an opportunity to operate outside of the legal framework.
So in this instance, who needs to be taken to task? Is it the client who has engaged this particular cooperative, or is it the cooperative itself by starting a cooperative instead of a company, bypassing old labor laws?
Both clients have a responsibility to make sure that people that are servicing him, they are also compliant, and also the cooperatives, they need to comply with the provisions of the law, because that is another process that they need to follow to make sure that the cooperative does comply.
Yeah.
So both client and the employer, they need to be taken to task, and we want to emphasize this part. The Department of Labor must assist us in investigating and making sure that all the legal processes has been followed before you can convert employees into a cooperative. Some of employees are not even aware that they have been registered as a cooperatives.
Now, if I could maybe just jump in there to take it one step further, there is an amendment to the Labour Relations Act, specifically Section 200A of the Labour Relations Act, which indicates that if there's an employer that is operating outside of the law, actually the client and the employer can be held jointly and severally liable. So to answer your question, there is a provision in law where those individuals can actually go after both parties, the client or the end user, together with the employer. And in the instance of a cooperative, I guess that's where those discussions would be happening.
Okay. Gentlemen, great chatting to you. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, kwanyalo kumbukeli sasifike emaphethelweni ehlelo lethu namhla ke ngicanga bonke ethi lethu ngesikhathi sabo ngithaza bonke kanye nani ke babukele ngekubana kuze kube manje asihlangane futhi ke ngevikile lidako la kumahamba phambili SABC 1 Mzansi for sure na ku SABC Plus lapho ke sitanetsela ke lenye indzaba letawutsinza wena nemalungelo akho njengemthengi. From me Simphiwe Ngongwane and the rest of the team nisale kahle and do have a great week ahead. Cheers.